Hello, in this video I want to have a look at Sagrada Familia Cathedral, Cathedral of the Sacred Family in Barcelona, Spain. It's still under construction, hasn't been completed, but it's very interesting, very depending on your tastes, either quite beautiful or possibly on the other way. But it's one of these churches, cathedrals, all cathedrals have certain elements in there which relate back to the ancient world and this temple plan. It's called the Hermetic Code by some. There's different names for it, but it's essentially it's sacred architecture, sacred geometry, and symbolism which predates the Christian world by quite some time. The Christian world is built on pagan principles which go back at least 5,000 years, probably much older than that. And this video will also tie in directly to some that I've uploaded in recent times. I'll put the links to them because it's very much connected to New Jerusalem, and the stories of the flood, as connected to not only the Manu in Hindu tradition, but also the Epic of Gilgamesh from Sumeria, Babylon period. So looking from the top there, you see, we have a white dove. This in itself, I recently did a video on Columba, or the dove, and how that connects across these flood traditions. And again, I'll put that link in the description because you'll find this video will just show a series of connections that cross cultures and cross time, and it's part of a pattern. And at least in the Western world, the modern world, it's a pattern that's been carried on very much through organisations such as Freemasons, Oddfellows, Rosicrucians, Templars, etc. But so, for instance, the Noah story, which is if you watch the other videos, links will be in description, how the dove and the raven and the flood, not only as described in Noah, but also the Epic of Gilgamesh going back at least 2,000 years before that. Also, these particular symbols such as the dove and the ark of the flood, for instance here on a Templars chart, but it's in all these, again, Oddfellows, Masons, this esoteric tradition. And this cathedral itself is, it's a Catholic cathedral in Catholic Spain. It's a Christian thing. So the assumption by most would be, it's got nothing to do with esoteric. It's got nothing to do with Freemasons. It's got nothing to do with the broader term, the occult world. Well, that's just not true. It is entirely built on these principles, Hermetic principles, ancient principles, what might be called pagan principles, but it's Christianity is not separate from paganism. It's exactly the same. The Bible is a rewriting of older texts, such as from the Eastern world, ancient Egypt, Sumer, even connects to stone circles in the British Isles and Western Europe, for example. Antoni Gaudi was the architect. I'm not sure of exact, but anyway, we'll get to those sort of details because they're very important. But it also, the measurements of the church, the symbols in the church, are all proof of this particular method. And so, in again a random world, these things will not happen, but they do. And symbols might be argued over. People might, skeptics might try and dismiss certain things. Well, it's this, it's that, it's but the proof of a pudding is in the measurements for one, and the fact that all these symbols come together and that they're repeated in so many places across the world, and including sites and cities and buildings that should have no connection but do. And it's just repeated over cross time, cross cultures, both in tangible elements such as in measurements and proportions, also some symbols, but also as we'll see here, even the dates, and also the period of construction as well. just to show that. Well, yeah, I'll get one as we get to those, but there's more to this than meets the eye. A lot more. It's a very interesting place, and it goes to show the long game that goes into these types of cities. For instance, Washington and Canberra would be two good examples where it's not just about dropping the plan down, the geometric plan, and then building the major public buildings to a specific set of measurements. It's also got to do with the long game and about how these will evolve over time. Buildings have a life. They're born, they live, and then they die, and that's an important point. It has a magic square. Now, this is not a true magic square because certain numbers will not be repeated, but they've arranged this magic square in a certain way. So, for instance, 33 is one of the underlying points. Now, Christian statues will be, 33 meters or 108 feet, and I usually say it's because 33 years of Jesus, but no, it's not. It goes back because even before Jesus, King David ruled for 33 years in Jerusalem, 33 feet in Mohenjo-daro across the ancient world. So just if that's what you think, it's not. It's more profound. It's very ancient. It's part of this code which extends through to, and Christian symbols have just been redesigned and have just been slightly brushed over to hide their pagan origins. But for instance, here the columns with the tortoise, sometimes we'll see a turtle. This is a key point in the Hermetic Code. This is a in your face confirmation symbol of what's happening here. And for instance, Archibald Fountain in Hyde Park here in Sydney. So we see now turtles in there. This is a Hermetic symbol directly related to Hermes and the Greek god Apollo. These are ancient symbols, as I've explained, and we'll have an examination of that now because these can be easily, you might not notice them, or if you do, they could be easily ignored and given some other meaning. Very often the literature connected to these things will give it another meaning, but again, it's hidden in plain sight. Now, for instance, in Sydney, the tortoise fair, well, we have, for instance, a lot of Mercury or Hermetic symbols, Hermes, Hermit. The tortoiseshell, the lyre of Apollo was made from a tortoiseshell. It was a gift given to him by Hermes. In return, Apollo rewarded him with a wand made out of olive, and then Hermes saw two snakes fighting and they wrapped around the snake. So that's where the caduceus comes from. That's the turtle. It's alluding to the lyre of Apollo. That's one of the points there. So again, this will be repeated across cities, across the world. It's hidden in plain sight. You'll see Apollo symbolism and Mercury Hermes symbolism connected. Now, once completed, the church itself would be 560 feet or 1440 Cremona hands. You can see the Cremona scale. It's you won't find it in modern reference books, but it was very important back in the time when this was created. All these, they'll choose a measurement which will harmonize between multiple sets of measures at very specific numbers, and will convert again to other sets of measures. So for instance, the Doric scale, which is very important in Freemasons, going back to ancient Greek as in the Dorians, 18,900. Now you'll see, give or take, just to move one decimal point, but anyway, 1890 Egyptian royal miles is the diameter of the moon. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of measures converging here, but that's of course not on its own, that's not enough. So, but also that will convert to 1680 hands. So once again, you just simply remove one of the zeros, just shift the decimal point, and we have a connection to time. So one of these, which will appear in many other temples, ancient and new, 168 hours per week. The 7-day week and 24-hour day is ancient, going back to at least to ancient Egypt, for instance. But also it will convert to palm, so G, 192, musical scales as well. But okay, so 5,760. Again, now the long foot, another ancient unit of measure. So we have a diameter of the sun. We already have sun and moon here. Also Mayans, very much connect, but the Mayans are using their calendar counts, their important numbers, or well, if you're into TVs, gaming, monitors, 576 resolution. New Jerusalem, the flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Yugas are all connected. It's in a very measurable sense. So, for instance, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they describe the Ark of Utnapishtim, and we'll get now on the Ionic scale, which will convert over to 144 on the Mohenjo-Daro unit. So again, we have more units of measure, several units of ancient measure, all harmonizing at very specific numbers which connect to very important traditions and legends which cross the world from east to west. So New Jerusalem in the Bible is in Revelations, it's the holy city as they describe. This is which is a retelling of the Epic of Gilgamesh and connected again to ancient traditions, but they've described the proportions of the city. So it's sometimes it will be furlong, sometimes stadia, but a cube with an edge length of 12,000 furlong or stadia, and the walls are 144 cubits high. And so, for instance, the New Jerusalem, so each face has a surface area, furlong or stadia of 144. Again, just a matter of a whole bunch of zeros on the end. The total edge length will be 144,000. The walls are 144. Now, I'll put a link also to this video where I went through sites around the world and how cathedrals and important memorials and monuments all have 144 built into the code. It's an essential part of this tradition, again, which crosses cultures, crosses the world. For instance, if you're in Australia, America, Canada, New Zealand, England, Freemasons would be the most obvious place to reference this, but this is not exclusive to them. It's crosses cultures, crosses the world. The columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Okay, so we go to the Parthenon, for instance. Now, the point of harmony points bringing multiple sets of measures together at very important numbers. So, for instance, 144, 192, 576. These are exactly the same set of numbers we're going to find here in this cathedral. If you're into it, look up Mark Wilson Jones and the Salamis stone, for instance, for the Doric and the ancient Ionic foot, but also the modern foot is an ancient unit. The history books are just way out of whack on so many things, but including the history of weights and measures. They just can't deal with it. They've just stuck in their paradigm. But anyway, the Basilica, I've called it a cathedral. It's the Basilica of the Sacred Family, the Sagrada Familia, 1440 Cremona hands high, or 560 feet in the so-called modern, but it's actually an ancient unit. Why is 144 so important? Well, for instance, there are 1440 minutes per day, which describes the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon. Once more will be under here. Ancient weights of measures, modern electronics, screen resolutions, for instance, 1440 is very important. In geometry, from your hexagons, your vesica, your nonagons, all of these using the 360-degree compass, another ancient invention, will bring us these very important numbers, again, which are numbers of sun, earth, moon, music, geometry, and very important in arithmetic. Also platonic solids, for instance, the octahedron, but also the 5 platonic solids will bring us to 144, and just a couple zeros on the end there. Fibonacci numbers, very important. Across dimensions, also, so a square foot is 144 inches. It's the 12th 144 squared. 144 is 12 squared. It's the 12th Fibonacci number. Rosicrucians, for instance, 144 octaves and 144 elements. From the east, the Middle East, to Asia and the Far East, it's just all over the place, folks. It's built into everything, and it's being used still now, even in the brutalist architecture of always glass and concrete buildings. They're still doing it, especially ones connected to banks, etc. But again, the Mayan calendar 144, the Yugas 1728, but it breaks down into units of 144. Mentioned New Jerusalem, so it's multiple in there, but you also find it elsewhere in the Bible. For instance, the 12 tribes of Israel with 12,000 each, so you have a 144,000 in there. Again, all the religions, all the traditions, ancient to modern. Here's a really cool part. Anyway, so 144 is very important in cathedrals. It's everywhere. But there are some very other interesting points. For instance, it was consecrated on the 7th of November 2010. Governor Lachlan Macquarie was very fond of that date, the 7th of the 11th. For instance, nearby town for me here in Sydney is Liverpool. That was founded on November the 7th, 1810. But also the street width of 66 feet will give us 144 on Cremona and 144 inches. So a 12-inch footpath or pavement with a 42-foot carriageway loaded with 44s hidden in there. But 7/11 gives us a pyramid proportions, which gives us a phi proportion or half pi. So for instance, that's the Great Pyramid. It's those this 7/11 happens. It's that date. When they consecrate these buildings, they'll do it on a very important date. Usually there'll be some sort of astronomical event, but also some very important mathematical connections, symbolic connections. It's just all over the place. It's not to be disputed. But here's the kicker. Here's a very important part. When these architects, when the money who goes into it, that's built on a very important piece of land, it's very expensive. But it's not just thrown up at whim. Firstly, the proportions, the numbers, the symbols, they all have to be precise. It's a very important part of this method. But in regards to the architect Antoni Gaudi, so the groundbreaking was in 1882. The scheduled completion will be in 2026. That's 144 years after the commencement. When they do these architects, they know that they will never see their plans reach fruition, because just like Washington, for instance, the Pentagon was built many years after the completion of the Washington plan on 9/11, September 11. Same thing here in Canberra, the Defence Headquarters, which has this pentagonal design, was built many years after. You'll see in Brasilia and Astana, this will also happen. The city has to mature. This is a long game. They're playing the long game here, and this Basilica is one of the key points of that. 144 years after completion. So, but also this is a model of New Jerusalem. And again, I'll put some links through if you haven't watched these videos, because it all connects. I'm being quite brief here, but you'll see that these are repeated symbols, including the doves, the measurements, and the use of pi and phi related. But Ark of Utnapishtim, 120 by 120 by 120 cubits. So we have 1,728,1728, or 12 cubed times 1,000. But New Jerusalem has it, because it's 12,000 by 12,000 by 12,000, we have the same thing. So the volume there is 1728, and just a bunch of zeros on the end. As with 1728, we have the sun, we have the moon, and we have the Temple of Man. New Jerusalem, or the Ark of Utnapishtim, also connects with the Yugas. Also, it's quite a lovely number in arithmetic, mathematics, and other things. Multiple sets of, so the long palms, or the long scale, for instance, or the common chain, 66 feet. I touched on that earlier. That's the standard street width. Sun, Earth, and the Temple of Man, and the flood myth of the Yugas and the Manu, and for instance that all these things connect. But also, say, the Mayan calendar, which we mentioned earlier, so 144. But the Yuga, Satya Yuga, will break down into years. So the entry, the middle, and the exit point of it, 144. The Hermetic Code, it's there. The symbols are in your face. So the Captain Phillip Fountain here in Sydney, you might even notice Cornucopia, Delphinus. There's Neptune and Vulcan. But here we have commerce. Hermes is the god of commerce. He's the god of weights and measures. Hermes and hermaphrodite. So very much like the Buddha, Hermes can have both a male and a female aspect. This code, this method, it's sort of written in symbolism. It goes back thousands of years. Places like Stonehenge, the stone circles all around that part of the world. The ziggurats of the Tigris Euphrates civilizations, such as Babylon, Sumer. well, yeah, the great and Mohenjo-daro, ancient Indian sites, through to modern temples, again across the world and across cultures. These very important numbers, these very important symbols, might change slightly. Each location will have a slight variation on it, but they'll always return to key points. Astronomy, the precession of the equinox, or the great year as it's called, is one of the core principles, reminders of all of that. So, for instance, you might the winged lion being one of the four evangelists. Which again, for instance, the winged bull in Christian churches, that's one of the four evangelists, but that's also a reference to Hermes and Apollo as well. So the original, before the Lear and the Caduceus, Hermes and Apollo was almost going to be a war on Olympus, because Hermes stole the cattle of Apollo, for instance. But so much more. These ancient legends, Greco-Roman, Egyptian, Indian, Sumerian, you'll find, you just, as you peel back each layer, they're just, they're profound, and then you use the measurement systems, and you'll find that it's in a very tangible form. Unfortunately, the modern education system, but also the modern mindset of people, is to be that we're the smartest, we're the cleverest. No one else, no ancient civilization could have had this type of knowledge. And when they do bring it up, if you bring up a legend or a mythology, well, it's just instantly dismissed as that you're a literal believer in these things. But it's, the more you learn, the better it is. The measurement systems are just rock solid evidence of this. You can try it now. Some will try and dismiss the legends, but the use of certain temple plans, certain measurements, that they persist to this day, to this very, very day, in places like Astana, is rock solid, indisputable evidence of this continuing code. Now, it's either passed on through secrets, or it's built into our DNA, and if it is, either way, it's just as profound, it's just as important. And it okay, I could go on quite a bit about this particular basilica and the other connections. I'll put some links in the description. With that, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. Please like, share, comment, and all that other stuff that they do. Anyway, have a good one.
Oh my.